My next question is something which you also have experienced in your personal life. I have listened to your podcast. It's about peeing after sex, how it can
Yes.
prevent urinary tract infection. And I remember you saying that how you were so convinced about it that even against in front of research and evidence, you refused to believe it, right?
Yes.
So can you please share a little bit of that myth, which all women are even today kind of believe it as true?
Yes, yes. So the idea that you have to pee after sex to prevent a urinary tract infection or a bladder infection, I think is just so drilled into women's heads from a young age. I remember even hearing this as a teenager, even before social media. And now on social media, it's just everywhere. And I was at a conference once and I saw a presentation from a medical doctor and a psychology researcher. They showed why by the time you're done, if you go to pee, it's too late. Like any bacteria that's gonna be a problem has already attached, and that peeing will do nothing. And seeing that, even with that information, I still didn't believe it, and I still kept peeing. And then in my podcast episode, I say how I realized I still got a lot of UTIs, and so clearly the peeing wasn't working either. But yet I believed in it so strongly, and then I just sort of accidentally stopped doing it, and then realized I wasn't getting UTIs. And yeah, it was just this weird thing of finally realizing that there's no evidence to support this, and there's been even more research since then showing that it doesn't help, and that even as a researcher, even presented with scientific evidence, I still didn't believe it. And so I think that shows how all of us once we have a preconceived idea about something, it's really hard to shake it
Right.
off.
Do you think it's the same phenomenon that works when it comes to things like nofap and semen retention, even despite the lack of evidence?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this no fap movement, this idea that if you hold in your semen, things like it will increase testosterone, which in fact it's the opposite. But people, yeah, once you get, especially online communities where you're in a place where you're just hearing what you want to hear, essentially, it's really hard to convince people otherwise. That being said, there's lots of ancient beliefs around chi, for example, and like maintaining that energy by not ejaculating, in tantra, like not ejaculating. And there can be like an interesting energy or experience that happens from training yourself not to ejaculate. But in terms of how we talk about it in the modern world and how it increases testosterone, there's just no evidence to
Connection.
support
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. So moving to the next question, doctor, regarding squirting, which is something which is very fascinated by a lot of people have this
Mm-hmm.
question. Is it real? Is it something which is just shown in porn movies alone?
Mm-hmm.
And also what I want to understand from you is what is the difference between squirting and ejaculation, female ejaculation? Is it both the
Mm-hmm.
same thing or is it different?
Yeah, so there's still murky evidence on this, but I think the most recent understanding is that ejaculation comes mostly from the Skene's glands, which are kind of like the male prostate. And like they're a similar tissue, and it's more of a milky fluid and not a lot of fluid. So it's similar to, say, a male ejaculate.
Exactly.
Whereas squirting, it seems to come possibly from somewhere around the bladder, where there's still debate about where exactly or how exactly it's produced. And it's often clear, and it is way more in volume. So there's a lot of it. And so often what you're seeing, if you're watching porn, for example, and you see squirting, that is the squirting. It's this clear fluid, and it absolutely is real. And some people argue that everyone can do it. You just need the right type of stimulation. Some people say that only some people can do it. But again, I don't want people to try to think they should be squirting or they should be ejaculating, because if you're experiencing pleasure during sex, however that happens, that should be good, and it doesn't have to look a certain way.
Does ejaculation happen to all women?
It's It's unclear, but some people argue that yes, it can happen for all women, but it takes very specific stimulation of that anterior wall of the vagina with specific tools or fingers. But there's lots of people who say they can't do it or have never had experienced it.
But am I right to say that it is more frequent than squirting, ejaculation?
I'm not sure, and I don't think we have data on that. It's very tricky. So when women are aroused and have orgasms, there's a lot of fluid. So we have fluid that comes through the vaginal walls. That's the main lubrication. And then we have a fluid from the Bartholin's glands as we get close to orgasm. So there's more fluid. So there is a lot of fluid going on, but it's not ejaculate. And some people do have ejaculate if you're stimulating those Skene's glands, which are part of that whole G-spot area now, the clitoral, urethral, vaginal complex. But for the average person, they're usually not ejaculating when they're orgasming for women.
For an average woman, she doesn't ejaculate when they're having orgasm. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So both ejaculation as well as squirting is relatively not common. That is what you're saying?
I don't know if it's not common, but you have to have a specific stimulation to make it happen.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay. But this clear fluid which comes from during the squirting process is not urine, right? It's something else.
It's in the research world that's still being debated. But people who do squirt say it is totally different than urine. It is not urine. But there's been different analysis of the fluid, and it does seem to have urea in it. It does potentially seem to come from the bladder area. And so some people try to argue that it's urine, but people who do squirt say that it's not. And so I believe the folks who are saying, I do this, it's definitely different than urine.
Okay.